Hello, my name is Tammy Rose, and welcome to Concord Days.
So this is Harriett Lothrop speaking in a letter to a reader for the D. Lothrop Publishing Company before Harriet was married, so when she was Harriet Stone. Please tell me if D. Lothrop and Company refused to take manuscripts other than Sunday school books, for I must see that I find in that case a publisher for the books I designed to write. I must speak truthfully, as I always wish to. I do not care to be identified as a Sunday school writer. This is no more important field to be sure. There is no more important field to be sure. But at the present day, with such a gratuity of silly, weak material as constitutes our Sunday school literature, I aim to do much outside of that field. At the same time, I always intend to write for the Sunday schools, doing what I can in my simple way to produce conscientious work, but I do not intend to write for it exclusively by any means. I know something where my power lies.
Lovely. And that was my amazing guest, Dr. Laureen Tedesco, who's a professor at East Carolina University. Welcome, Laureen. How you doing?
Thank you. Hi. Welcome to my little office, Tammy.
Exactly. All right. And so today we're going to talk about Harriett Lothrop. And as you mentioned, her maiden name was Harriet Stone, right? Mm-hmm. So our viewers might be more familiar with her as Margaret Sidney, the writer of Five Little Pepper books. And just to give us sort of a grounding in years, Harriet Lothrop's years were from 1844 to 1924. So she lived a good 80 years. And she ended up publishing over 44 books, including lots of articles. And we're going to get into her publication history and what children's literature publications were like back then as well. Because it's a really fascinating story. One of the other reasons people may have heard of Harriett Lothrop or Margaret Sidney in Concord specifically is that she is the woman who has saved many of our historic houses. So she's known mostly for purchasing and living in the Wayside, and that's at 455 Lexington Street. And in case you didn't know, she was also responsible for saving or for helping to save Orchard House, which is at 399 Lexington Street, as well as Grapevine Cottage, which was owned by Ephraim Wales Bull, who was the inventor or the person who ended up developing the Concord grape. And that's at 491 Lexington Road. So if you're driving through Concord, you see all of these houses, and they're pretty much in actually probably better shape than when she found them. And the main reason we have all of these author houses is because of her persistence and her love of history. And I would like to show off one of my fabulous old books that I found at the Barrow Bookstore, Old Concord, It's Highways and Byways. And so not only was she a great author, or a very prolific author at the very least, if you're not into children's literature. But I loved her Five Little Peppers books when I was a kid. But she was also very much into history and preserving history. So Laureen, did I do a good job?
You did a great job. You did a great job. Another Concord related book is she has a book-length poem called The Minuteman, the shot heard around the world. And I understand she wrote that after they had bought the Wayside, once she had Concord on her mind.
Yeah. And also, let me also go into another side note before we get into the full conversation about her. So the Wayside in and of itself is kind of a microcosm of Concord authors. So if you visit it now, it's preserved kind of in its 1924 form, which was the year that she died. But the history goes back, I think it was originally built in the 1700s. And the Alcott family bought it and lived there from 1845 until 1848. They called it Hillside. And then a few years later, it was bought by Hawthorne in 1852, and they owned it until 1870. And now here's where it gets confusing upon confusing. Hawthorne's daughter, Rose Hawthorne, married a guy named Lathrop, L.A., yes. Right? And then they bought that house in 1879. And then Harriet and her husband ended up buying it in 1883. So it went from the Lathrop family to Harriet Lothrop's family. And also for those of you who are interested in Rose Hawthorne, she's the one who actually ended up becoming a nun and starting the Hawthorne chapter of Sisters. So it's again one of those pieces of Concord history where you just begin unpeeling the onion and you discover there's so many layers.
Well, and history. I had this date before we spoke and I've lost it, but at one point in the 1880s, the Alcott family moved into the Wayside, as the Hawthornes called it, in a wing. Hawthorne was in Europe as some kind of U.S.
as the consul for Liverpool.
That's what it was thinking. Good.
Yeah. So frankly, I'm a big fan of the Beatles. So there's a part of me that really wants to think that Hawthorne's influence in making Liverpool what it was ended up birthing the Beatles practically, less than a century later. But that's just me.
Oh, good. I gave you a chance to talk about a hobby horse.
Exactly.
Well, so he was in Liverpool, and so the Alcott family was having some repairs done to Hillside or something, and so they lived in a wing of the Wayside for a little while. And I've got this date scribbled somewhere, and I'm not seeing it offhand, but in the 1880s, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and frankly, so going through all of these real estate records, I will warn all of you historians out there that there's a big difference between owning a property and having your name on the document and actually living there. Because it doesn't, people were traveling, people were renting things out. Hawthorne himself ended up renting the old manse the first time he came to Concord in 1842. So I feel like there's a lot, and Margaret Fuller had never actually owned property in Concord, but she stayed with Emerson a lot. So she's still considered a Concord author, but there's no physical space for her. So, it's a lot of friends crashing with friends. And, so as much as we want all of those dates to have a very strong significance and all that, it's
Good.
Cool.
Well, where are we going next?
So let's talk about Harriett Lothrop, because as I mentioned, I read Five Little Peppers when I was a kid, loved it. And it's a series, I think, of 11 books. And
there were 12 books.
12 books. Thank you. And I didn't really know about her beyond that. And of course, there are some people who like children's literature, and there are some people who think that it doesn't count as literature. And to also mention Louisa May Alcott again as a writer, her whole thing about writing Little Women was her publisher had requested it. She tossed it off in a couple of weeks, and then she handed over the manuscript, and she didn't really care for it. Publisher didn't really care for it. It got into the hands of a little girl, his niece, and she read it and loved it. And, it turns out that you don't always know your audience. So I feel like Harriett Lothrop is we have been discussing this before. Learning about how she actually got into print was an amazing, story that I would love to share with our viewers, especially those writers out there who, love to send things in and are looking for feedback, and sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't. And I think Harriett Lothrop was fighting to get useful feedback, right? To figure out what she wanted to write. So yeah.
I want to start by showing some of the old books I have. Some of them, a couple of them are the gift of someone in Concord that I want to give credit to. And then I'll talk through this question of how she went from sending things out desperately, too many, right? When she was single, beginning at about age 30. And then her big break was with a pepper story. That was in 1877. Polly Pepper's Chicken Pie. And then she sent another pepper story, Phronsie Pepper's New Shoes. And then outside of the letters that I've been able to read, sort of, I guess, in conversation, she was contracted to write a year's worth of Wide Awake stories for the magazine owned by Daniel Lothrop. And so in 1880, what became the Five Little Peppers was serialized in Wide Awake, one installment a month. And she had to come up with that. She didn't know she could come up with a whole book. But in 1881, that was published as a book. And I've got an 1881 copy that Jane Siaka, and please forgive me, Jane, if I'm not saying your name right, in Concord gave me. I did a visit to the Wayside and to Minuteman National Historical Park. They allowed me to speak about Harriet. And so Jane gave me this lovely 1881 copy. And when I went home, I actually walked off with this one as well. And when I contacted her, she said, keep both. So this is Five Little Peppers, the first book. It may not be a first edition. A book that describes the first edition tells me I should have yellow end papers, and I don't. But it's a lovely embossed cover with gilt in it. And then the same with Five Little Peppers Grown Up. One of the mini sequels. At some point, I had collected this little set with Five Little Peppers Midway, a less one in poorer condition, Five Little Peppers Abroad.
But like I always love to call them well loved, you know.
Yes, before it got to me. I'll just do.
And I will just admit that I'm a bibliophile as well. So yes, I love this. So describe what it is that you're holding right now.
Yeah. So Wide Awake is the annual or the Christmas gift edition of a year's worth of magazines. So you could subscribe to the magazine, and I don't know whether you sent them in and got them bound or you just bought the bound edition. But this is, I believe, 1883. It's coming apart. I didn't buy it this way. I bought it in Newburyport, by the way, not far from you.
Yeah.
But passing it around to classes, it kind of lost its cover. But so it has a whole year's worth of stories in it. And it does have a story and a poem by Margaret Sidney, who is Harriett Lothrop.
Lovely. Yeah, there's something really magical about holding old books, and especially the ones that are embossed or have gold or whatever on them. It's like, I always think of them as jewels, you know. Yeah. But my earrings are not expensive because I'm always expecting to lose them, but I refuse to lose my books. And I always try to keep track of them as well as I can.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, shall we start with how Harriett Lothrop began trying to publish?
Yes.
So she, and most of this I've gotten from letters that I've read at Minuteman National Historical Park that owns the Wayside. And Harriet's daughter, Margaret, gave that house and all the family papers about the publishing company. All of her mother's attempts to publish, or many of them, I don't know, there might be other letters, her own correspondence with the Alcott family and other people as she was researching her own little book. This is not a beautiful old book, it's just a library copy, The Wayside Home of Authors, and Margaret Lothrop wrote this. So all of this is at the house. It's in a little farmhouse behind the visitor center. And you may be able to help me with who owned this house. I don't know. I don't remember. But there's a squash court, an old squash court where they keep all the manuscripts, and they go and, they pull out the boxes when someone comes and requests them.
Oh, that's cool.
So
no, I didn't know about that at all. So now I'm going to.
Oh, you don't know about this?
No, not at all.
There's a little walkway behind the visitor center that takes you back there, and that's where. So I've got to give my bread and butter card here. Terry Wallace is now retired, but she was the archivist or curator for many years of that collection. And so from about 2012, not sure exactly when she retired, let's say to 2016 or so, I went periodically, and she just pulled boxes for me and told me how to pronounce the Lothrop name and all kinds of interesting things about the family to help me orient me in my research. And then she retired, and I'm fuzzy on the date, but Steve Neff, who's still a museum technician, he's in that office there, and he has helped me on subsequent visits. And, we've corresponded. So if anybody wants to go and see this treasure trove of material, that's where you go.
Right. And again, it's owned by, it's not an independent author house. It's owned by the National Park Service, right? National Historical Park Service.
And by Minuteman National Historical Park, which is kind of interesting because it's not a Revolutionary War topic. So as you mentioned, the house was built in the 1700s, so maybe it counts.
And I'm certain that if an organization is, given a house, they're not going to say no, especially with such significance. Yeah.
So she was one of three girls. She had sisters, Julia and Mary, and Julia married and had some children who corresponded with Harriet. That's in those letters from her little nephew, Sidney Stone, for example, are in that correspondence. And then she had another sister, Mary, who was the home daughter. She stayed with her father, after the mother died. And it seemed more that he was taking care of her. But so there were letters, always about, everyone's concerned about Julia's health. So I think maybe she was an invalid. And her father was a very prominent, nationally known architect, Sidney Mason Stone. He designed some churches, apparently, that are well known. They're still standing, but I don't have that information on me.
Yeah.
But
I've always thought that there's an affinity between architects and writers, because writers are sort of building things with words and architects are building with stone. And I feel like his name is completely appropriate to his profession. So
yes, Sidney Mason Stone, her father.
yes.
So they're in New Haven, Connecticut, and she's writing from 43 Elm Street, sending out all kinds of things. So beginning about 1874, when she was 30, she began sending out poems and short stories, mostly children's things. And we've got it. Oh, she did publish something in a kind of women's magazine early on, but she's sending them out. And then in around 1877, she really gets going. So we've got, or at least those are the things she preserved records of. We've got records of her her letters to editors, or actually their responses, mostly rejecting. So I'll show you a little later her many rejections. And she sent out so much, you're not really supposed to stuff a whole bunch of things in one envelope. So she would send a lot in one envelope and they would complain, or they would say, oh, you're sending us so much, we feel like we owe you an explanation of why we've rejected it. And she would get these kind of cutting comments about it's too sloppy. You should recopy it for us, because you had to send out a handwritten copy.
Yep.
And she also got another kind of comment that I think wasn't necessarily her fault, which is you're using too much slang. You've got rough characters. You've got characters speaking ungrammatical things that parents don't want their kids to read about. They don't want their kids in this company. And so she got quite a few rejections along those lines about slang and about low characters.
Right. So it's interesting that you mentioned slang, because so Mark Twain was dinged specifically by the Concord Library, and this is for Huckleberry Finn. The Concord Library was the first to ban it from their collections, specifically because of the slang, and specifically because they didn't want their children exposed to that kind of rough talk.
So
and
very in sync with what was going on with Harriet then.
Yeah.
I don't know for her that it's always like her slang. I don't think it's always as artful as Twain's,
right?
But she's using it. And when she got her Pepper stories published, the first ones had quite a lot of lively slang. Later, it was toned down in book publication. And of course, the same happened with Louisa May Alcott. With Little Women, she had a lot of slang in it. A second edition was cleaned up, and the slang was toned down. Marmee was made more noble looking. So
right. And this is something that we've come to almost expect in at least in 20th century writing, where writers are more into realism and trying to be a little bit more natural, and however it comes out. And I think in the late 1800s, everybody was still sort of in that straitjacket of like every sentence has to be super grammatical, and everybody is going to speak full sentences even if they're children. And
realism was arising in the 1880s in publishing for adults, but the question was, for children, do we want realism or do we want good models?
Exactly.
And so there were, both things were happening. And so Twain in Tom Sawyer, the Century edition of Tom Sawyer, also was sort of cleaned up a little bit in terms of its slang. Yeah. So this happens, and it happened with Polly Pepper's Chicken Pie when it appeared in some book versions over the years. It became increasingly less slangish, and the mother was no longer allowed to speak in her colloquialisms. So, nor was Polly. The boys could, but Polly and her mother could not.
Oh, the boys could. Oh, that's interesting.
The boys, they can say it. Girls should not do that. Mothers should not do that.
Right.
So, so she sent out quite a lot and got quite a lot of rejections, but some gradual acceptances. Youth's Companion was something she was publishing in their children's column. This was a children's magazine, but it was aiming at teenagers and an adult audience as well. So she wrote for the children's column. Okay. And then her first really major acceptance, as I mentioned, was in Wide Awake. And the editor, Ella Farman Pratt, Ella Farman, who then met her husband at the Lothrop Publishing Company. So Ella Farman Pratt, the name changes across the letters. Yep. She loved Harriet's stories, and she wrote her what I would almost call gushing letters. But she also wrote some reproving letters about not doing such sloppy work, and gave her advice about other editors that she was having conflicts with. Mm. So when we look at some letters a little later, I'll show you one in particular that didn't like her things. And Ella Pratt said, don't write to him. Give him at least a year. He likes the boys' things. Let him get tired of his other contributors. She tells them.
And honestly, so like this is one of the points that I would love to sort of come across to the viewers, that, you know, sometimes whatever it is you're writing, you just need to find the right audience. And sometimes the first audience is not actually like the children or, you know, the people, the end readers that you're thinking of. It's really the editors, because sometimes the editors are looking for very specific pieces in magazines, or, you know, if they're going to be publishing a novel, they want something that's in a very specific kind of genre. And, you know, if you're writing to them and just sort of like, you know, throwing your stuff all over the place, hoping that something's going to hit. But you do have one person, and it sounds like she found her mentor, who is able to help her just navigate the business a little bit.
And liked everything she wrote pretty much, except the things she thought were too hurried. So she said something about Phronsie Pepper's new shoes. It's a lovely story, right? And another letter, she complains, when are we going to see something from you again? So she really likes her, where others are saying, don't send us so much. So
right. Or it's too long or something. Like I feel like that's something that almost every writer suffers from. Like, you do need somebody to just say, yeah, cut this in half, you know.
Yeah. And she got that. She got that.
Yeah.
And Wide Awake was one of the two leading children's magazines at the time. St. Nicholas was kind of the dean of children's literature. That it ran for about 50 years, and its editor, Mary Mapes Dodge, has been praised as just an exceptional editor, bringing new famous people like Twain into writing for children, and Kipling. And she just really cultivated her authors. And so Harriet has one story that appeared in St. Nicholas, one that got accepted and never appeared. And then she has a couple of rejection letters from Mary Mapes Dodge. And anyway, so what happened once she got in with Wide Awake was that made her career. And my Wide Awake has just fallen. That made her career. So she published those two stories. She published Five Little Peppers, which became a bestseller. And it's in a book that lists bestsellers. And it was serialized in 80, 81, that was published. She had two other books published by that same publisher, something called So Is My Fire, that I'm not sure I've read, something called The Brockton Boys, a school story with really unpleasant characters. And if we get to this letter, you'll see the editor of Lathrop Sunday School book saying, I've never met so many unpleasant people in one place. I don't think it's very realistic.
Wow. Yeah, I think that speaks more to the editor's life than actually.
I don't know. He was telling her that her stories were too dark and the characters too unpleasant, that people don't want to spend time with such unpleasant people, and suggested that she read Miss Alcott, who has a more cheerful tone, and people feel better for having spent time in the company of her characters. So
right. And also, so since you brought up
yes.
Louisa, I also just want to bring up, there is a little bit of a similarity in the plot point between Little Women and Five Little Peppers. I don't know if you want to get into that, or if you want me to get into that, or
you talk about it. I think it's slight, because I think that of course Little Women is a much better novel, but there are some the story arc is similar in some ways.
Exactly. And when I'm saying similar, I just mean like a bunch of children in a family in reduced circumstances, and, trying to make the best of things. And then there are these sort of ancillary characters, like there's a piano in both of them, and there's an elderly benefactor type thing. But I also feel like they might start in a similar place, but I feel like both of them go in completely different directions. And obviously, if there's 12 versions of Five Little Peppers, and Little Women has its own world, I feel like those are completely separate. But it's one of those things that I've seen come up on the internet, and I think that there's definitely the possibility of some kind of rivalry, but I've never actually imitation, but I've never actually seen any documentation really discussing it at the time, at least. So
I mean, what we do know is that Harriet clearly admired Alcott and the Alcotts. When her husband bought the house, she made it in some ways a literary shrine, right? She was trying to recapture these famous authors and their furniture and the wallpaper, and try to recreate Hawthorne's house and the Alcotts as well. So she was really happy to be living in a house that had been owned by famous writers and a children's author. And so I think there's certainly that possibility that she's at some level imitating one of the most successful children's books of the time.
Right.
I don't see anything wrong or surprising about that.
Exactly. And it's actually like more of a tribute that she would be saving not only the Wayside, but also Orchard House, in a very loving way. So we all have a lot to thank her for, especially the Louisa May Alcott people, because I feel like their lives intertwined in lots of happy ways. So
good.
Yeah.
So she published these books, and then in 1881, there's a letter where she's writing to one of the editors who's been kind of mentoring her through the mail, saying, I'm not really satisfied with the price I got from Lothrop and Co. on my first book or books.
Yeah.
Could you suggest another publisher? And we have the publisher side of the letters, not hers, but you can tell what he's responding to. And he's saying, no, you can't expect a lot of money for your first couple of books. You need to stick with them. So by the end of the year, she's married Daniel Lothrop. and so I think that letter was about February. The first hint of an engagement that shows up in the letters was about April. And so they get married in October. And then she publishes tons with Lothrop and Company. And I don't think it's only because she married the publisher. She seems to already have established herself in that company, but it helps, right? So
exactly. And also, like, I didn't mean for us to bury the lead on that at all. It's I feel like this is the story of a woman who is so eager to write that she is getting advice from one editor, and that she's also feeling comfortable enough to challenge how much she's getting. And frankly, like, Henry David Thoreau was doing the same thing when he was trying to fight for getting paid, because he definitely had written things, and I think they were even published, and he was still waiting for the check to come in the mail, so he was writing to, and I don't know if this was Horace Greeley, but, and he also dealt with Margaret Fuller as his editor as well. So I feel like when you get into
uncommon.
Yeah, exactly.
So in a conversation that you and I had off camera, we talked about that I felt I came to Margaret Sidney research, or Harriet Lothrop research, through Pansy, another Lothrop author, Isabella MacDonald Alden, whom I went to Concord to find her in her publisher's archives, right? And then got interested in these letters, these rejection letters to Harriet Lothrop. So one of the letters that made me feel that Margaret Sidney was pushy, I didn't like her voice in the letters in comparison to Pansy, is in the University of Florida's Ruth Baldwin collection. It's a children's literature collection in the Smathers Library. And in it, she's telling Lothrop, Lee and Shepherd, it's the company who bought her husband's company after he died, and bought the rights to the Peppers books. And she's saying, look, you keep saying you've given me a lot. You just gave me, I believe it was $500 for 12 books. And she's going on and saying how they didn't pay her. They haven't really given her anything. And so, I signed these things away, but you're not really treating me right. So this is where I thought she was pushy. But a colleague said, well, she's a woman in a man's publishing world, having to fight for her rights and having to establish herself. So that's exactly what you were talking about. At this point, she's a widow with a daughter, probably in high school by that point. And so trying to make it work.
Absolutely.
So after she married Daniel Lothrop, she published regularly in Wide Awake, if not every month, at least several a year. Then she would publish serials, which would then get published as books. She wound up with 44 or possibly 45 books. I have a question mark in my list. And then also she published in another Lothrop publication, the Pansy, which was a Sunday school magazine. It was a religious magazine. So that quote I read at the beginning about, I'm not writing strictly for the Sunday school. Lothrop made a lot of his reputation in publishing for the Sunday school market. You would go to Sunday school and get a little ticket from Sunday school that you could check out books from the Sunday school library, because there were not widespread public libraries. Right. And so Sunday school libraries, they had a religious character, but they provided a lot of book access for kids. And there are even some accounts of kids who went to other churches because they were bookaholics, and they went just to use the Sunday school library. So Daniel Lothrop,
that would be me.
Yeah, that would have been me too. So Daniel Lothrop really pursued that market and advertised in Sunday school magazines. And Pansy was one of his top selling authors, and he published perhaps 150 books with her as well.
God. And Pansy is the pen name of
Isabella MacDonald Alden, a Presbyterian minister's wife. They live various places, so I can't quite place them at the moment. that they moved around. But she started her magazine herself, and it was promoted through a Presbyterian newspaper. I want to say it's the Westminster Herald, but I'm not thinking of it offhand. But she published it. She published serialized things with them for a couple of years. Then somewhere around the late 1870s, mid 1870s, Daniel Lothrop, I think he must have courted her. He must have found her because he published some of her things simultaneously with a tract company. And then by 1880, she was solidly established as his author, and he was publishing little Pansy libraries, little book sets that you could get for a cheaper price for your Sunday school. And so her magazine that she had started herself, he then took over, subsidized, I suppose, and published. And he wrote her lots of letters suggesting, what should go on the cover or what she should be publishing. So in that magazine, Margaret Sidney published quite a lot. And then when there were little annual, Pansy playbooks or whatever, stories from the Pansy, her stuff was in there, hundreds of stories. And then eventually she had already cultivated Christian Union and Congregationalists and some other religious newspapers and some children's magazines and things that she was publishing in. And she won a contest for either the first issue or the first year of Good Housekeeping, got a cash prize for a series of 3 articles about the home. And so anyway, she was really professionalizing herself. So when I first started reading this, I thought, she did better because she married the publisher. But I think that was not the only thing going on. I think she already was grooming herself and getting this advice that we talked about. And, so I don't think it was only him. It certainly helps to have a husband as a publisher. Some of the letters show him negotiating a serial contract with another magazine. But it seems that she already was moving in that direction and professionalizing herself.
Yeah. And I love it. And we haven't said the word brand yet, but I feel like Pansy is a brand, and that sounds like something that was very consciously done. And Pansy certainly didn't need to marry her editor, right? And
right.
When Harriett Lothrop is also working on her own brand, it's great to have people say, "Oh yeah, so here's all the children's books that you're writing, and let me encourage all of that. But here's also opportunities to write other kinds of books as well, right?"
Yes. So she wrote some local color stories. So one that I wrote about in graduate school before I was thinking about a long-term project on her, The Judge's Cave, was about the judges who sentenced King Charles I of England to death. And they fled England after the Puritan government ended, and came to New Haven, where Harriet Lothrop was born. And they supposedly hid in the cave because they were worried that they would be killed. They were the Regicides. Wow. And so she wrote a story about that. That's apparently a local legend, like some of the Concord local legends. Yeah. And she wrote a number of New England stories. One of the ones that I hope, the one that she was arguing with the editor about in the quote that I read, was one called The Pettibone Name, a New England story. And so she liked these local color things. She liked this kind of colloquialism, the kind of thing. She uses Harriet Beecher Stowe as her model when she's writing to this D. Lothrop reader to say, well, Harriet Beecher Stowe, has these characters who aren't educated, and they use ungrammatical speech. And if they didn't, it wouldn't be realistic because they didn't have schools. And so, she's seeing herself as a Harriet Beecher Stowe, right? And let's forget Alcott. How about Harriet Beecher Stowe? Or okay, have you heard of Rose Terry Cooke?
No.
So I only heard of her through letters of Harriet in that Florida archive. Rose Terry Cooke was quite a good woman short story writer. She was one of only 2 women to be published in that very famous Now, I did not check my name on this. Oh, yeah. It's the magazine that Thomas Wentworth Higginson edited. What?
Yeah, no. So Higginson, Higginson is also one of the beloved authors. I read a group called Transcendentalist 2021 on Facebook, and I think we're going to focus on him in November, doing the Civil War.
Quite interesting.
Yeah.
And a friend of Bronson Alcott.
Exactly. And he was the one that, so we need to do a whole program on him because he's very influential even in the anti-slavery movement.
Yes.
His relationship with William Lloyd Garrison and his activity in Civil War all of the amazing stuff that he's done. So yeah, so she was printed in.
So she was published in the very famous, very important literary magazine of the late 19th century, whose name is completely escaping me. But she was one of only 2 women published in that. Harriet Beecher Stowe was the other. And she was quite a good and interesting, and in many ways feminist short story writer with kind of a biting tongue. So she published a little article with advice to Marianne. Advice to Marianne. It was advice to all the women who wanted to get published and telling them how it's harder for women to get published, and you need to face it. You need to expect rejections. You need to expect lower pay. And so this really resonated with Harriet. And so there's a copy of a letter that she sent to Rose Terry Cooke saying, I know exactly what you're talking about. And she sent her, we've got the copy is in this Florida archive, but apparently she sent it, just talking about the trouble she encountered and the disappointments. And so that was another literary model for her, was Rose Terry Cooke.
Yeah.
As I said, quite a good local color writer. And I think that's what Harriet was trying to be.
Yeah. And also, so another piece of my own research is other women who've written like good housekeeping type models. And like Lydia Maria Child wrote Frugal Housewife in 1832. Julia Ward Howe wrote Is Polite Society Polite in 1895. And I love that was always, that there was a very, very specific women's market for things that, whatever. And because these ladies also wrote other novels and other, things that were sensational at the time, but they sort of get known for some of the things that aren't as controversial.
Right.
Yeah.
So Harriet published all those kinds of things, and that's kind of where she went. Then, so after a long, happy marriage, in 1892, her husband died fairly suddenly in May 1892. Excuse me. And then she was running the company with his brothers, whom he had started early on as a sort of partnership. The various businesses that he started that eventually became the publishing company. There was a drugstore, and then a bookstore, and then the publishing company. His brothers were involved. So for about 2 years, she was running it. Some have said the business failed because she didn't know how to do it. I don't know. I don't have the evidence. I don't know, but she seems to be doing it and running the magazine. And Ella Farman Pratt and her husband had moved on to other things. They were working for McClure's. And one of the letters from her brother says, "We've got to sell the magazines." And so that's when they sell Wide Awake to St. Nicholas. And so it was absorbed. St. Nicholas absorbed quite a lot of children's magazines, including the one that Harriet had trouble getting published in, Harper's Young People. So anyway, so that was sort of the end of that. And then there are a couple of desperate letters where she writes to Hezekiah Butterworth of Youth Companion saying, "Please, could you give me some work? I'd like to be an editor. I'd like to publish something." And I don't know what the result of that was. That's a case where we have the copy of her letter, not his response. But eventually, she traveled about. She helped her daughter get an education. She published more things. The employees of D. Lothrop and Co. Formed their own company called Lothrop Publishing Company, and they ran that for maybe till about 1904, something like that. So from about 1894 till possibly 1904, they ran it. And then Lee and Shepherd, a major publisher that was publishing for a good bit for children, bought it and put the Lothrop name in front as part of the contract, which tells you that the Lothrop company was important, that they would that their name could go at the front in that merger, in that sale.
Exactly, because again, like this is about brand, and it also seems like it's not so much that you're describing the failure or business, like a woman running a major publication, like is that a failure or not? It sounds more like the evolution of the publishing industry, because you definitely in my lifetime I feel like it's morphed into lots of different things where one gets sold to the other, and yeah.
And then that company disappeared from view. I think I lost it somewhere in the 1990s. It was still publishing children's books, primarily children's books. And then somewhere in the 1990s, I think it's Random House that absorbed it, but it just disappeared. Like even the imprint disappeared.
So wait, the 1990s or the 1890s?
1990s.
1990s.
So from about
around for like 100 years.
Yeah. From about 1904 to 95 to about sometime in the 1990s, Lothrop, Lee and Shepherd was publishing mostly children's books by that point. Yeah. And then that imprint or that that publishing name. I can't find it anymore. Like I was looking for the archives, right? I wanted to go there.
Right.
It's Random House or something, and I just didn't even try.
Yeah.
They're too big. They're too big.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Like I completely understand that. Yeah. Like I was saying,
I didn't think they would have Daniel Lothrop's materials, right?
Yeah.
I mean, some that the Wayside had, or that Minuteman has. There's still more. There's more to see.
Okay. Exactly. And it's, I feel like when a house gets donated and all the papers come with it, it's kind of treated as a treasure, where even if they don't have like the appropriate staff to deal with it, at least it's sort of put aside and hopefully put in like acid-free boxes and at least preserved for like the right scholars to come and find it. But and
Minuteman has done that.
Exactly. Yeah. But I was going to say, my friends in the publishing industry, they're kind of like, oh my God, it's just more paper.
Yeah. And so I'd be very surprised if they still had these things from the 1880s from 2 companies back or 3 companies back, right?
Right.
So would you like to look at these letters?
Yes, I would love to.
Let's look at these letters. So we've been talking about her rejections primarily. That's what interested me in this story because I was interested in Pansy, and here's this other voice who in the obituaries of Daniel Lothrop and in all the stuff about him, she's mentioned as one of his authors, and Pansy, is the religious author, is neglected. So I was a little jealous on Pansy's behalf. And so let's look at some of Margaret Sidney's things. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and I always love that there's always some kind of hook, like when you're doing any kind of research, I'm definitely known for, falling down rabbit holes. And, I start with one topic, and then I love just going wherever my curiosity leads me. So I highly applaud you for that, because look at what you've done.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
This is still a work in progress. I've done some presentations on it, but I have an article that some editors have suggested some changes that I need to return to and find the right audience for.
Yeah. Well, and the whole reason I found you is from your talk a couple of years ago at the Minuteman National Historic Park. That was, I must say, like semi-legendary, because somebody said, oh my goodness, yeah, Harriett Lothrop, this is the person to talk to. She's the one
that was really nice.
Yeah.
They treated me really well at Minuteman. Okay, let's see. Slideshow.
People there.
Yes, they're very wonderful. Yeah. So those of you who are in Concord, this will all be very familiar. But down in the lower left, I've got the picture of the Wayside, and it's been renovated since the picture I've included here. And then on the right, the visitor center, and you see the little path to the unmarked archive that we were talking about. That was a farmhouse from the area.
And you're talking about you're talking about the visitor center at Minuteman National Historic Park, right?
Sorry, yes, on Lexington Road.
Exactly. Yes. And this is different from the Concord Visitor Center, which is sort of just off of Main Street, and it's a smaller building and whatever. So yeah.
Thank you for helping me, for orienting me. Yes. Thank you.
Yes. No,
we need the Concord voice for that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I just want to mention a couple things that are not the letters, but some of the treasures that I found in this overwhelmingly large collection of papers that I could still go back to and find more. So Harriett Lothrop had some little home notebooks. They're in a box marked that, with a few diary entries. So some notes on her honeymoon trip with her wonderful husband at West. My favorite is a little notation of an encounter she had with Elizabeth Palmer Peabody and Mary Peabody Mann. Harriett Lothrop was pregnant with the daughter that would become Margaret Lothrop, right? And Elizabeth Palmer Peabody had lots of advice about how to have a pain-free pregnancy, pain-free childbirth. And she had this fruit diet that she was recommending, a little pamphlet, Parturition Without Pain. She said both her sisters used it. They didn't have any pain. And then she even wrote some letters, some follow-up letters, one letter to Daniel Lothrop saying, have you any news of one we both care about, wanting to know about the outcome of the birth? And then she said like a one-liner to a man, very, very chaste, right? Have you any news, right? And then she sends a very long concern letter to Harriet asking, saying, I'm so glad you're better. I'm glad you have someone nursing that child, because that's not good for you to nurse her. And just going on about her sister's pregnancies and so forth. She's a single woman, giving advice about childbirth and so forth. And
I also feel I love Elizabeth Palmer Peabody, and I feel like she was kind of known as like an auntie, and even before that, she ran a bookshop. right? So she
I
was
had
also
heard that.
this amazing, like, I want to say feminist activist who,
Mhm.
gathered people around all of these really great books. So I love that she's picking up a book that's kind of like about vegetarianism and for
Yep.
childbirth,
Yep.
and she's like still recommending stuff. This is great. I love this.
And then later, and I believe it was after Daniel Lothrop died, there are quite a few letters from her to Harriet saying, oh, let's go to the Metaphysical Club together. Elizabeth Palmer Peabody lived in Jamaica Plain, which I gather is a suburb of Boston.
Yep.
You can help me out on that.
Yep.
And
like maybe 20 minutes, maybe half an hour from Concord, something like that, maybe a little bit more.
But okay.
Yeah.
And then Harriet lived in Boston much of the time. Even after they bought the Wayside, the Lothrops still lived in Boston, and they used the Wayside as a summer home and helped run the School of Philosophy, where Bronson Alcott was a speaker, and they had these house parties and these kind of like publishing fetes that I think she was trying to be like Annie Fields, the wife of the famous publisher James Field, Ticknor Fields, right. Who she was a known hostess, and I get the impression from the letters and the regrets and the different people that she invited that Harriet was trying to do that, or maybe she just enjoyed entertaining, but she did that from the Wayside, had these kind of entertaining events, and had these elaborate birthday parties for Margaret. Some of this material is in here, where she published a little book of I think there was one where Margaret was in a cocoon, maybe like her 7th or 8th birthday, and she has to come out of the cocoon, and then she's a butterfly. Or there were a number of very elaborate birthday stunts that apparently Margaret did not enjoy, and she mentions briefly in her book. But the program from these events was published by her husband's company, and then it's in the thing. So anyway,
I love that.
But so she and Elizabeth Palmer Peabody were going to the Metaphysical Club together, and I didn't check on what that is, but there are a number of letters where they're meeting to go to that. So they became friends later on.
Yeah.
Then there's a couple of patent applications from Daniel Lothrop that I just think are kind of neat. He designed a book shipping box. It was wooden, and after you got your books, you could reassemble it into either a 3-shelf or 5-shelf wooden bookshelf with wall sconces. Isn't that cool? I just think that's
I want that.
Yeah, I wanted to. Yes.
Yeah.
And then in 1877, he put in for a patent for a folding writing case that had compartments for stationing envelopes, and you would refold it so it was a lap desk. So
very, very cool.
Box and a removable tray. So
yeah,
he was quite the self-made man in terms of his business that he built up himself and this kind of thing. There's also a deed, or possibly a copy of a deed, it's been a while since I've seen it, signed to Elizabeth Alcott when property that belonged to her niece, Lulu Ricker, selling it to William Torrey Harris in 1884. So Orchard House was sold in 1884. Sorry, this is 1885. So this is a different property, and I didn't go back to my notes to see which one it was, but I got quite excited to see Louisa May Alcott's signature in an unexpected place, right? In someone else's archive. And then Harriet wrote quite a lot of letters. What I read at Minuteman were the letters that she received, because that's what she saved. The University of Florida has some of the ones that she sent. So whoever donated those, must have been connected to the recipients. Right. And she got quite long, quite frequent letters from some of her cousins, some letters from aunts and uncles. There was a Miriam Butter that she got quite long letters from. There was the Maker family, Machir, in Toronto, wrote her quite a lot. And once she married Daniel Lothrop, they would write thanking her for gift for books that she sent, or asking for connections to Daniel Lothrop because they had someone in the family who wrote. There was a poet in the family, for example, who did become a Lothrop author. There's some letters, as I mentioned, Elizabeth Palmer Peabody. There's an Oliver Wendell Holmes letter. I think that one's actually to Daniel Lothrop. Samuel F. I have an A here. Samuel F. Smith, the author of the song America, for beautiful, for spacious skies. Yep. And so there are quite a lot of letters from him, both to, he was a family friend. So as was Oliver Wendell Holmes. Whittier, I'm sorry, as was Whittier, not Holmes. Whittier was a family friend. And and she even wrote a book called Whittier with the Children. He was a friend of her daughter, of her child, or her little girl. But Samuel S. Smith wrote this really moving letter after Daniel Lothrop died, giving his own experience with grief and giving her advice. And he wrote her a poem about it. And so did this poet, Harriet Prescott Spofford. And there were some others. And so those would make a wonderful article, just what people would say at a time when letter writing was practiced as an art. How it was so moving, what they told her, the advice they gave her, and the way they kind of bared their souls about their own grief and how they dealt with it. And then what we're going to look at now is her extensive correspondence with the editors. And there's some publicity material for Wide Awake and the Pepper books that's quite interesting as well.
Well, I want to just thank you for drawing all of these out, because I feel like some people think that, history is sort of like it's past and there like everything has already been studied, but I feel like there's so many different networks and relationships that we have never even explored, that it's so great to know that all this stuff even exists. So thank you.
So, and I hope I'm not taking too much time with this, but you're making me want to tell two more things about the letters. So one is, in one of the letters, her correspondent says, this was such a hard year. My family member was sick and nearly dying. And then the president was assassinated and lingered so long on the point of death. And I wanted to know, what president? And in the little archive, when I was working at it, they didn't have internet access. So later I found out it was McKinley,
right,
who was assassinated and then lingered and then died. And then she has quite a few letters from her cousin, Wellington Crosby. I'll show you one on one of these slides. He has a lovely fancy crest on his stationery, and he writes in this sprightly style. It's kind of gossipy. And he says in one letter, his father is in the cotton business and is on the cotton exchange. And so in one letter, he's having a number of letters. He's having the grand tour of Europe, and he's saying all the things he saw. He's sort of checking off the box. I saw the Sphinx. I saw this. I saw that. And then he sends her felicitations on her engagement and says, I think he won't be able to come to the wedding. But then in a letter, he says that he's seeing a girl that his parents don't know about. Your cousin Harriet. I hope you're okay.
I'm fine. Go ahead.
Okay. He's seeing a girl that his parents don't know about. He's writing to cousin Hattie. This is Harriet. And don't tell them. Well, doing some newspaper research on him, the next year he's married to someone else, not that girl, an heiress that I think his parents probably approved of. And then he dies pretty soon after. And she's doing the bridge circuit. She's winning bridge contests on cruise ships when she's traveling with her very wealthy father. And then a son with his exact name inherits, sometime later. But anyway, in that family, there was a scandal. His father somehow did dishonest dealing in the cotton exchange and lost his seat on it. And all that was in the newspaper material as I was looking at Wellington Crosby. And then the son sort of took his father's place for a little while, and then I think the father was reinstated. But this little scandal of the past and the kind of interesting family history about, he married the heiress, not the one the parents wouldn't disapprove of. The parents would disapprove of. So anyway, that was just 100-year-old gossip, right? Or 150-year-old gossip.
I love it. Thank you.
Okay, let's take a look. So this is some of that publicity material. So there were quite a lot of these pamphlets advertising her books. So here's one with a very formal portrait of Harriett Lothrop or Margaret Sidney and the famous Pepper books. This one, the one in the middle has Ben Pepper with Franz. I'm sorry, that's not Ben. That's Jasper with Phronsie. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over things, but on the donkey. And so there's a little advertisement there. I liked these books as a child. Later, when I was in graduate school and read them again for fun, found them a little too saccharine. Mm-hmm. It bothered me that Phronsie was still saying Japser at about 6. Yeah. The 6-year-olds I know could handle that name. She was listening really into her teens, right? Because she had to be kept the youngest and she had to be kept cute.
Right. Like Cindy on the Brady Bunch or something, right?
Yes, exactly. That's a really good connection. Yes.
Yeah.
And so then here's a little note in Harriet Lothrop's hand about Samuel F. Smith, I'm correcting his name, mm-hmm. commenting on Daniel Lothrop, saying that I've always, he's a pleasure to me. I've always loved him ever since I first saw him. And so Harriet Lothrop writes, blessed words. Do I not know how no one can help loving the noble man who is my husband?
Oh,
yeah.
That's very sweet.
Yeah, it's very sweet.
Yeah.
Terry Wallace, the retired archivist I mentioned, had told me that they didn't see a lot of letters between the couple or between the daughter and the parents in the collection. Maybe those letters were kept somewhere else. So this is one that's speaking of her affection.
Yeah.
Then here are her little home notebooks, and they're about 4x6, pretty small. She used them for various purposes. And in Florida, they had one of Daniel Lothrop's that he used as a little, almost like an appointment book, and then he would cross off the little memorandums he wrote to himself. So there was one where he was supposed to tell Pansy something about a cover for the commemorative year of Columbus's landing in America, which would have been 1892. That was the year that she wanted to have some kind of Columbus-related cover on the Pansy. Anyway, so here's something like that of Harriet. So you see 1890, and she's written out what she sent off. She scratches out who she sent it to, returned on these two, they returned. And so she kept these little books of lists of things she sent out and whether they got accepted or rejected intermittently. So she'd do it for a few months and then quit, kind of like the way I kept a diary when I was 12, right? You start it and you stop. So she has those for various dates. So I've already mentioned this, the Parturition Without Pain diary, mentioned a little notepad. Here's another notebook. It's not signed, but I believe it's Harriet Lothrop's, not Daniel Lothrop's, because it doesn't mention any work-related appointments. But it's a Europe trip, and it gives, what they did. They did take a trip together that then became one of Harriet's books, How They Went to Europe, which was a fictionalized version. That honeymoon trip out west was also became a children's book, the Ridgeway Club Out West, I think is the title, but it's about a group of young people going out west, and she used her trip with her husband as, I guess, the fact-finding mission.
Right. Right.
So,
And let me interrupt that. So Margaret
Sure.
Fuller also had a book called Summer on the Lakes, where she went west. And I feel like it was still kind of a really big thing to go west and then come back.
Cool.
Henry David Thoreau went later just for his health because he was really suffering from tuberculosis, and I think he was expecting like a really long trip. And this was sort of within like the very last year of his life, and he needed to come back immediately because the air was not as clear as he had been promised.
He'd been told.
Yeah, exactly. He went as far as Minnesota. But
Wow.
like reading through all of that, like going west was a huge thing. So I'm very glad that people were able to not only keep journals, but then also like write about it and sort of say, yeah, this is my
and she
reaction, and this
did.
is why I'm coming back.
Yeah, and it was a kind of exuberant young person's adventure in that book. They're all kind of piling into the train and seeing where they go. So one of the little notebooks, she's got some pressed flowers in it. And both a bouquet picked by my dear husband, right? So she wrote Saratoga Congress Park, October 1881. So they married October 4th, 1881. So this is that honeymoon trip.
Wow.
And then she says, picked by my dear husband at, I don't know if I interpret her handwriting right, Yulton, California, April 15th. Don't know, that's right, where the train stopped for dinner. And then another bouquet picked by my dear husband on the prairie between something and something. I couldn't scratch it out on the morning of April 14th, 1882. Carried all the way to Los Angeles.
Oh, that's
So
sweet.
Another little of that marriage tribute.
Yeah. Well, and now you're just making me like itching to actually go and like hold these things in my hand, because they're
You should.
like, especially with pressed flowers and stuff. It's like there's some kind of immediacy about that. It's really, really
so
lovely.
Steve Neff is your contact. So
thank you.
So here's a table of just a few years of her acceptances and rejections. I didn't make it for all the years. So in those pre-marriage years leading right up to, remember, the first Pepper story was published in 1877. She had a few other things published in Wide Awake in that 78 years as well. So you see the red ones are the rejected ones, the return ones. Here she got $5 from Phronsie Pepper's new shoes. That was a lot more than it was now. Is now. Used Companion gave her $3 for something called Pussy. And Curious Fidget was about a dog that went after a gopher or something. So that got her $3. That was in Used Companion.
Yeah.
And then more return things. Okay, Curious Fidget was rejected there.
Yeah. And I was going to say, so for any of my writer friends, I have kept things like this, and I know lots of other writers have. And frankly, I know a writer who is trying to start a kind of a Twitter campaign to share all of this, because frankly, like there was way more red than, than green ever appearing. And so it's great that you've been able to sort of to do this from, like sort of backwards, to sort of say, all right, this is what we have actually in print. This is what she's been paid. And this is what it was like to actually be, trying to get published. In the 18th,
and she has a lot of the manuscripts of rejected things are in that Florida archive as well, the Baldwin collection at University of Florida, and some of them are dreadful. There's one I read and I was like, this is awful. But she, as you mentioned earlier, she found her voice, she found her audience, and she got some good advice, right?
Yeah,
from long-suffering editors. So
yeah, the main point is always persistence.
Yeah, and she did persist, and then she had quite a successful career publishing as I don't remember if we put up the number already, 44 or 45 books, and then quite a lot of stories in those collections from the Pansy and from Wide Awake, and also quite a lot of magazine fiction and some essays and things here and there, and including some Concord essays, some author tributes to Hawthorne and some others. Some other Whittier, for example.
Right. So, and also this is a complete tangent that I hadn't mentioned before, but she was a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution.
Yes.
And then she also founded the Children of the American Revolution, which was sort of like, if the daughters were getting together at tea parties, this was something for their children to do. So it sounded like an early version of like Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
Of like getting together.
One of the reasons that I visited Concord the first time was because my dissertation director, Lynn Vallone, had a colleague, Susan Miller, who was researching Children of the American Revolution. And she had been to Minuteman to use the Margaret Sidney, the Harriett Lothrop family papers. And, basically said, come on in, the water's fine. And so that was my first visit, followed her report from Susan Miller that it was a good archive to visit.
I love it.
Yeah.
Love it. All these little breadcrumbs, coming together.
All these, yeah. So here's one of my Wellington Crosby letters. He has this lovely copperplate handwriting.
Yes, and I want to make wallpaper out of that. That's so gorgeous.
And look at his crest, his WC, and he's very gossipy. And in a later letter, he's about 24, and he says, this is my first year working for my father, and he's writing letters right now from work. But anyway, the lovely letter. This letter, he's saying all the things, checking off all the boxes of what he saw in Europe, and says he's bought some lovely views of things, and he hopes to show them to his friends. I'm kind of picturing a slideshow that people may not want to see, but exactly. He sounds like a lot of fun.
Vacation pictures.
Yeah, exactly. And his letter, his envelope, if you'll notice, is black bordered because he had a death in the family.
Oh, yeah.
This is about the time Harriet's mother had died, but I'm not sure if he had a death in his own immediate family. So here's some of the letters. So Harper's Young People was a hard sell. She had some trouble with this one. This is an editor that Ella Foreman Pratt from Wide Awake gave her advice about. So he says, Miss Stone, I once heard a little girl describe an apple tree that bore an unusual quantity of fruit as a very profligate tree. Had she known you and seen the great number of stories that you write, I think she would have applied the same expression to you and described you as a profligate author. so he's kind of putting her down, right? You're pretty similar to me. Your last story is good and interesting as fault is a fault that can be found with all of your stories, an extravagance of language, which though natural to some children always sounds badly, even from them. And appearing in print looks much worse. So
that's hysterical.
These letters are very funny. And I'm afraid I'm laughing at her expense because I'm glad I didn't get these letters, but I could.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, wait, and that last line, if you want to go back.
Sure.
It's not so much on this account that I return your story as that I have so many on hand that for the present, I do not want any more.
And this author wrote some adventure stories set in Florida and other places. And so there's one point where he tells her, look, I want to publish something of mine and I don't have room for yours. So it's the truth, right?
Exactly. At least he's honest,
Yeah. And I mean, they're taking their time. They're busy. And apparently sometimes she may have pestered or followed up a bit, and they'll say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't answer your letter of X date, and then this one came. So she's following up, and they're taking time and being very generous with their time.
Why do
So
you
he
not send here
says-
something fresh?
Yes, exactly. Not these articles that have gone the rounds to several other places. And you saw on the list that I had that she sent some of them out, and apparently she didn't recopy for the new place. It really seems to me that you owe it to yourself to give your natural quickness the graces of art, and moreover to prepare a clean, handsome copy, which has a great deal of effect on the busy publisher. We don't have this problem anymore, right? We don't have to handwrite it or even sew it. Some of them are sewn together. And so, she didn't have a typewriter or a computer to help her.
Yeah.
So you'll see quite a different tone with Ella Farben Pratt from Wide Awake. I could not use the May basket. I am delighted with Three Little Pigs. If you will but look sharply to your measured rhythm, no one will surpass you finally in this sort of thing. I wouldn't be vexed for the Christian Union. Mr. McCormick is wholly candid and honorable, and is just as likely to appreciate the next careful thing you do.
Next
so there's
careful
that
thing. Yeah.
Frank advice. But
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
And then she had seen something about a serial being wanted, and so she tried to produce it. I should hardly expect a serial written in 8 days to be accepted in anywhere. You must not do hurried work. You ought not to want to be able to fill orders on short notice. You cannot build a shining reputation that way. You were such a nervous Margaret. And she's writing to her by the pen name, which she seems to have adopted with her first Wide Awake stories. Before that, she was publishing under her initials or sometimes other ways. You need to be soothed and calmed into the quiet mood in which one best faces life. Mr. McCormick has done no unusual thing in the time he's taken with the manuscript. I often am obliged to give a manuscript 6 months before looking at it. It was a serial story. Few editors would take time to give you suggestive criticism, as does he. So again, she's kind of coaching her, right?
Exactly.
So
at least 3 times. Yeah. No, I love this. This is, go ahead.
Yeah, where they're saying it's too long. 900 words was the outside limit, right?
Yeah.
And so she had another letter from an under editor, and he's saying, didn't she tell you 900? And she did. That letter is in the correspondence.
Okay.
So he gives her $3 for something he'll use on New Year's Day. The others aren't what I need. You complain of being hampered by limited space, but if you really wish valuable practice, I can think of nothing likely to be so useful to you as to practice rigorous condensation. A short article is always more likely to be accepted by any editor than a long one. The heaviest part of my own work is cutting down the manuscript of other writers.
Yes, that is a very common complaint of any kind of editor I've ever heard. So yeah.
Okay. So that hasn't changed, right?
And not at all. Not at all. Yeah. Try to like short and sweet, get to the point, cut out all of the extraneous stuff, make it, 3 times as short. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So remember, I was saying before that she just stuffed a bunch of things in an envelope. So here this letter is covering 3 submissions. So $6 for 2. And then we're returning Emmeline the Dismal. That doesn't sound very, very happy and very good as unavailable. They use that expression that the story is unavailable when they meant they didn't want it. So it actually was available, but they were not available to publish it. So it seems to have been editor slang or editor jargon that they use.
Yeah.
And then she says, if you will count your words and write the number in your manuscript before sending them, you will confer a favor, as it seems easier for each writer to count their own than for the editor to do them all. And this same sub-editor makes the same suggestion a number of times to her.
Yeah.
You're not counting your words.
Exactly.
And so again, we're obliged to return so many of the articles you sent us lately. We are sure you will be better pleased if we give you the reasons and a little criticism. The incidents are very bright and very enjoyable from a grown person's point of view, but the long words you use in your prose articles are beyond the comprehension of the little ones. While frequently the incident commends itself, the article requires to be simplified so much before it can be used for the children to whose minds we have to adapt our pages that it needs to be almost entirely rewritten. And she's writing for different audiences. So this is that children's column of Youth Companion. Some of her local color things are aiming at an older audience, maybe a teen audience, and then an adult audience.
Right.
And then the rhymes don't seem to be carefully written. The meter's rough and irregular. And so he gives her
right. And this is somebody who hasn't even read Walt Whitman or like the poetry of the day. And like, if you're going to be writing for children, everything has to be smooth and careful. And, how dare you try to do like meter that's rough and irregular?
But I'm not sure. I don't know if she was doing it on purpose. I'm inclined from having looked at some of her rejected things that this wasn't bold new ground she was taking, but that she needed more care. Okay. She needed an apprenticeship as a writer.
Yeah. Even Henry David Thoreau is not really well known for his poems for good reason, apparently. So
yeah, it happens. Yeah.
Yeah. Poetry is hard.
And this is little verse, kind of light verse for children that she's trying to have. So here's good news from your companion, right? We've got a check for the broomstick brigade. We've got a check. We return with thanks, meaning we don't want it Tommy's or Timmy's last piece of cake. I couldn't read the writing. I wasn't sure which it was.
Yeah.
Here it is again. Pardon us for saying your articles seem frequently to indicate that they were written too hastily. Of course, with other duties pressing in your mind and not very much time at your command for writing, it seems much easier to write while the inspiration is on and send the story poem up at once. Don't you think that a revision, a careful reconsideration of the manner of expression, etc., would give a nicety and finish to your stories that would pay in the end? With the incidents fresh in your mind and consequent familiarity with them, it seems to us you could revise and correct and bring out your incident more clearly in a careful revision than the editor can with more painstaking.
Yeah.
As you have wished for criticism and have taken to it so kindly, we feel you accept it in the spirit with which it is given. And then, they did publish a lot of her stories in News Companion. So apparently she did work out a working relationship with them.
Well, I was going to say, it sounds like she needs a secretary,
Okay.
so maybe after she got a few things published, she was actually able to say, let me just dictate this to you and you can rewrite it. I will pay you. Yeah.
She was living at home with her father. Her mother died somewhere around this point. It was either 1880 or early 1881. So it may be that she had lots of home duties, right? That she had social expectations and home duties as well, with an invalid sister and so forth.
Exactly. I feel like women of the time, and like when you think about household duties and whatever, I'm very happy that women got a chance to write it all. So.
Well, and they didn't have all the appliances we have, right? Although the expectations go up with the ease of the task. But anyway, right. Yeah. Right. So here's Harper's Young People, that editor who rejected something before, saying, I've again returned your stories, but I will accept the Little Smith's 4th of July. And here's his little teacher thing. If you will add about 2 pages to it, telling how the children succeeded with their studies and which one of the 3 did the best. I'm sure all young people will ask these questions. I think they don't care and be disappointed if they're not answered. And then he says, I would warn you against fitting ungrammatical expressions into the mouths of your young people. Your travel story I don't like. So again, he's covering lots of things at once because she's just sending so much.
Yeah.
She's not pacing herself. So E.D.G. Prime was a clergyman, and he and his brother edited New York Observer, and he gave her quite a lot of advice. Are we still good on time, or do I need to come to a close?
Well, I think if you want to come to a close, because I think we're at kind of a good time to stop. Yeah, but keep if you want to go through the rest of
we'll do this one.
All right.
So Prime tells her, after having written her several letters, I do not think you have quite apprehended the objection I made to using some of your former stories founded on the language of some of the characters you introduced. In order to bring the character and condition and needs and the rough virtues of those who are in humble life before the minds of readers, I do not think it necessary or even desirable to quote freely their ungrammatical and somewhat vulgar language. I regard it as even more undesirable for young readers like those for whom our youth department is prepared. The young are too ready to take up and use such language. As I've said before, I prefer to set before them pure models of speech as well as of character. So she got this a lot from editors. So is it because, as we talked before, they were being very careful about what they set before the children? Was she kind of a pioneer in slang and colloquial speech? She used a lot of that in her Pepper books.
Right.
Or is it that she just needs an editor to say, no, you can't do this? I don't know, but that's what I'm writing about in my article on Harriet.
Oh, well, exactly, because I feel like that's always like the struggle of writers, where you want to be creating something new and something that people haven't really seen before, and not just be, writing everything that fits within whatever the prescribed lines are. You want to color outside the lines. You want to be a little bit more exciting, and you want to push boundaries. So yeah, I totally get that.
But you also want to get published.
Yeah, you also want to get published. Exactly. So,
oh my goodness, I think that we covered a lot of ground. Thank you, Tammy.
We did. No, thank you. This has been a marvelous adventure, and I feel like Harriet really doesn't get her due, especially like the fact that she feels like one of the founding mothers of Concord, and in terms of its author history. And I really feel like she is. So it's so great to be able to talk about her as a writer. And, I would hope that she would also like be laughing about all of these and about all of these rejection letters, after she's, she has her whole library of 40, 44, 45 books behind her, that's like, yes, this is what you have to do to be a writer. You have to go through a lot of rejection, but then look at what you can actually do when you actually get a chance to have your words in print.
And
So
she seems to have had a very happy marriage and a very satisfying life that she wanted as the wife of a publisher in this literary world, not only writing herself, but having these parties and doing these things that she could do with a
yeah,
publishing company at her disposal, right?
exactly. And it's wonderful. And then so her daughter ends up living out the rest of her life at Wayside and then donates
Not
it.
all of it, not all of it.
Or not all of it. Okay. Yeah.
Well, she went to Stanford, and I believe it was in home economics. She got a degree there. And so apparently she moved, her mother died in 24. Apparently she rented the house for a few years and then moved there herself in 27 and gave tours. So, I mean, I think she was in and out and then began to use the house as a museum, right?
Yeah.
Into
Yeah.
from about 27. Anyway, in the 20s up until she donated to the National Park Service.
Exactly. And so yeah, so I think I was trying to paint a little too much of a happy ending picture, just because I still have Mark Twain in my head. I had written a play about Twain and Thoreau a few years ago, and I went to Twain's house in Connecticut, and he ended up losing it because he lost his fortune, and like that was very tragic. But he had built a marvelous house from scratch, and it's known sort of as this big Mark Twain house in Hartford. But he did not end up living out the rest of his life there, and Twain did not have as happy of a of an ending as.
So you could say she lived most of her remaining days there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, and thank you so much for helping me like keep to accuracy. Because it's really important that like, thank you very much for calling me out every time I want to.
Sorry.
No, I'm a playwright and I want to construct these beautiful narratives, but I always feel like real life is a little bit more interesting than that. So thank you very much for bringing real life to Harriet's publication history. I really appreciate this.
Well, thank you for letting me talk about this.
Yes. All right. And to all of my viewers, thank you very much for joining me and Laureen Tedesco from Eastern Carolina.
East.
Thank you.
There's that calling out. Sorry.
No, it's perfect. East Carolina University. And we will see you next time on Concord Days.